Looks like we have lots of folks signing on. Welcome everybody who's signing on.
Welcome everyone. Yeah. Hi, I'm Beth Tyson, and we have many people joining us now. We're going to start in about 5 minutes once everybody has logged in. Give people a few minutes to get here. I know people's schedules are hectic, so but thank you all for joining and for being here today. We're going to be talking about childhood trauma and how we can help kids cope with some of the experiences that they're having, but also how to build trust with children who have been through some pretty traumatic experiences. So we'll get started in a few minutes. Before we get started, we're going to make some announcements so that everybody can be on the same page today. If you don't have any water with you, get some water. Make sure you're hydrating as we go through this. It's a lot of information. It's going to be an hour-long presentation with a 15-minute question and answer period at the end. You're welcome to stay on for the question and answer if you have time, but if you don't, you can always click out whenever you need to. We are trying to record this webinar. However, we've had a little bit of technical difficulty making that work, so I can't promise that we'll have a recording of it to share with you after the presentation is over, but if we do, we will definitely be sending that out to everybody. We're going to try our best, right?
Right.
So take a minute if you're already here, get some water, and try to put aside all the other things that are on your mind and that you're working on right now. So for anyone who missed the announcement a few minutes ago, we are partnered with Aurora Mental Health Center in Aurora, Colorado, who is hosting the webinar today for us. So thank you, Aline Ratliff and Louise Dunaway, for being here today and making this possible. We will be we will be having people from all over the world participating today, which is pretty exciting. The power of Zoom. Some good things have come out of this COVID situation. We're connecting with people we normally would never have connected with if it wasn't for this situation. So a little bit of a silver lining there. So yes, we have people from the United States mostly, but also people from the UK, New Zealand, Australia. I even heard from one woman who said she was going to get up in the middle of the night, 1:30 in the morning, to listen to this webinar. So we are so thankful and so grateful for all of you for being here today and making this time to be with us and to learn how to help children cope with trauma. It's very important work. We're going to wait about 2 more minutes and then we will start the presentation. I encourage you to take this time to maybe take a deep cleansing breath before we get started. Some of the information in this webinar can bring up emotions within yourself. So I just encourage you to take a moment to breathe in through your nose.
Meanwhile, the Baton Rouge Police Department is now dealing with 2
and out through your mouth. And just put aside all the other things that are going on in your life right now and today, as difficult as that might be, and try to just be present and be here with us today for this time.
Traumatized by Gina's murder, that she actually moved. Try to get as far away as she could from this.
Somebody's watching the news.
If everyone could put their microphones on mute so that we don't have any interference during the presentation. You're also welcome to turn off your camera if you'd like. And for confidentiality purposes, if you would want to change your name on your Zoom profile, you can also do that. There should be 3 little dots next to your image You click on that, it says rename, and you can rename yourself to anything you want. Okay, it's now 11:35. Welcome everyone. I'm very excited to get started today. I have a few announcements before we get going. You may have heard them already if you signed in early, but what we need to share with you today is that we are trying to record this webinar. So if you want your name to be confidential, please click on your image on Zoom, and next to that there should be 3 little dots that give you the option when you click on it to rename your image so that you can change it to anything you want and that it will maintain your confidentiality. You can also turn your camera on or off. You do not need your camera on for today. The other information is that we will be accepting questions in the chat box. I will be answering the questions at the end of the presentation. And I won't be able, depending on how many there are, I probably won't be able to answer all of them. So if you do have a question that does not get answered at the end, you can send me it privately via email. And everyone should have my email. I've been pretty good about trying to keep in touch with everybody the last few weeks. So I just want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for being here today and for taking the time to try and learn how to help children who are suffering. Make sure all of your microphones are on mute for the duration of the presentation. At the end, again, there will be a question and answer. There will be an opportunity to unmute if you'd like to, but please wait until the end of the presentation.
And if you have a question during the presentation, you can put it in the chat box. Yes. So that you don't have to interrupt the presentation and we can just read them at the end.
Correct.
Did you already say that?
Yes, but that's always a good reminder. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see it okay? Okay. So the name of this webinar is called Rebuilding Trust After Trauma. And it is a webinar to help people understand and learn about what trauma is, how it affects the children in our lives, and how trauma affects our own lives, and what we can do to help ourselves and children cope with the trauma that they have experienced. Short disclaimer, this presentation is for educational purposes only, and the information contained in the presentation is for, or does not constitute professional advice. Also, all the images are stock images, and any stories or anecdotes that are shared are purely coincidental. All of the information I share has been changed so that I can protect confidentiality. I also want to remind people that the topics may bring up emotions within you that make you uncomfortable. You are always free to leave the webinar at any time if you feel overwhelmed or if you feel like something has been upsetting for you. So, introduction. I am Beth Tyson, and I am a therapist and a trauma-responsive coach. I also wrote a book called A Grand Family for Sullivan. I'm a CASA and Voices for Children volunteer, and I'm an imperfect human and presenter. So I am, not perfect, as most of us are not. And so today there may be mistakes that are made, or there may be times where I get stuck, and I just want you to know that I'm doing the best I can, and sometimes I get a little nervous, like all of us do. I wrote the book, A Grand Family for Sullivan, and, well, let me back up a little bit. The work I did as a therapist was within the foster care system, and I worked with families in crisis oftentimes when they were about to have a child removed from their home. It was my role to try and stabilize the situation, increase positive interactions within the family, and help the child remain with their foster family so they didn't have to move to another family and experience more trauma. So that's where I earned my experience and my understanding of trauma, and also what inspired me to write the children's book, A Grand Family for Sullivan, which is about a family, a kinship family, which in the U.S. refers to any relative or close friend of a child who is raising them because their parents are unable to keep them safe for some reason, whether it be mental health issues, incarceration, drug addiction, or even disabilities in some cases. So that's who I am. I also have a daughter who's 4 years old, and she inspired me to write the book as well. So today what you will learn is about the foundation of trust and its role in helping kids cope with trauma. If anyone here has played the game Jenga, I think you'll have this image make a lot of sense to you in the way that I explain this. So I'll ask the rhetorical question, has anyone played the game Jenga? And if you have, what you'll know is that you start out building a strong and stable tower. And I like to think of this as the child when they're first born. You know, they're born whole. They're born resilient and strong. But over time, events in their life, adversity and traumatic events, are like taking out a piece from the Jenga tower. And every time a piece is taken out from the tower, what happens? The tower gets a little weaker, right? And gets a little wobblier and a little less strong and resilient. And eventually, if enough pieces are poked out of the Jenga tower, we know what comes next, right? It falls down and it falls apart. And so that's how I like to explain what it's like for a child to experience trauma, is that they've had these pieces of their Jenga puzzle removed by different instances. And now we need to rebuild that, help them rebuild that tower again and put those pieces back. So I mentioned a moment ago adversity, and so we'll talk about adverse childhood experiences. The acronym for that is called ACEs, and this is something we're seeing a lot about in the media and online. If you read anything about trauma, it's really hard to talk about trauma without ACEs. So ACEs are potentially traumatic events that occur during childhood from 0 to 17 years old. And ACEs, the ACEs study that was done by CDC and Kaiser Permanente in the 1990s showed us the truth and the data behind what we already knew anecdotally, which was that adversity and difficult situations in early childhood create negative long-term outcomes for health and well-being. You know, we could see this happening in our own life, right? You know that the more struggles and troubles you had as a young person, the more difficult it was to navigate through your own life. And here, now we have the data to support that. So types of ACEs, I'll go over quickly because you may all be aware of this, but I'm not sure that you are, so I'll share it just in case, is experiencing or witnessing abuse, neglect, death of a loved one, abandonment, attachment disruptions, divorce, mental illness in the home, or drug abuse in the home. And so these are the instances and events that were studied in the ACEs study. And then what is trauma? Trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing event, like an ACE, that ruptures trust and safety in the world around you, impacts the way and changes the way your brain functions. And also, I'd like to tell people that it's subjective. So it depends on many factors whether or not a child will experience trauma after an adverse event. And some of the things that determine whether that happens or not is supportive or protective factors. So a child who has a very strong support system at home or has a temperament and a instinctual resiliency, born more resilient, might not have a traumatic reaction to an ACE or two ACEs. But if you have a child who doesn't have as much support, or who was born with a little bit more sensitive temperament, then that is when you might see trauma reactions arise. So it doesn't happen to everyone. One person could experience the same exact situation and maybe not be traumatized from it, while somebody else could. And that's important to remember. And then with also the disclaimer that, severe abuse and severe neglect and severe, child abuse is going to create trauma pretty much no matter what. So one of the questions I get from parents that I work with is, what is with all the behaviors? They just don't understand the behaviors, and it can be really difficult to make sense of what the child is doing. So I want to go over a couple of reasons why you're seeing so many challenging behaviors. So oftentimes a child who has experienced trauma and chaos in their home feels more comfortable repeating what is familiar to them. So if you grew up in a household there was a lot of screaming, a lot of fighting, you were in trouble all the time, you couldn't please your parents, you were being abused, when you are then removed from that situation and in a new situation, and you are in school or you are in a foster home or an adoptive home, you are going to be out of sorts, like a fish out of water in this now calm and structured environment. A calm and loving structured environment that often is the complete opposite of what they came from. And because we are all creatures of habit, we will try to repeat what is familiar to us, right? So we want to create that chaotic experience again, because that actually feels more comfortable and more normal. Children in these situations have also learned that close relationships equal danger, big danger. So the people that they trusted most in the world to protect them, keep them safe, have violated that trust and have broken that trust. And that is a very dangerous situation for a young child whose survival is predicated on that relationship to the parent. So close relationships become dangerous in their minds, and they feel as though they need to keep people at a distance in order to avoid being hurt again. So there can be fear of attaching to new caregivers or teachers or counselors out of a fear of being hurt again or of being rejected. And then there is the case where negative attention is serving a purpose. So many children in this situation have been neglected. And so negative attention is better than no attention, right? So you may wonder why all this negative attention. Well, that may have been a survival mechanism for the child when he or she was being completely ignored at home or neglected. Positive attention was not even on the radar, because negative attention is going to happen more quickly than the positive attention ever will. So all of this and the experiences they've been through with adversity and potentially traumatic events puts the brain into a state of hypo or hyper arousal. Now, I giggle a little bit when I hear the word arousal, because I know that most of you probably don't hear that word relating to mental health or what we're talking about. But that is the technical term for what happens when the brain is pushed outside of its window of tolerance and into a place where coping is decompensating. It's not happening, and the coping skills have shut down. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. And I truly believe, and I hope you will believe too after this, that kids do the best they can. They do the best they can. When something is in their way, they cannot do the best. And so we have to shift our perspective on that these are troubled kids or bad kids, or that these kids, that there's no hope for these kids, And remember that we just need to figure out what's in the way. We're not going to bring a magic wand. I'm not handing those out today in case you were waiting. I do not have a magic wand. But I do know that kids do the best when they can and if they can. And that's something it's important to remember as you're dealing with kids in this situation, that these behaviors are not on purpose. These behaviors are not because they are malicious or evil or any of those things. It is that these children need more support and they need to feel as though they are safe and out of danger. So we'll talk about the continuum of arousal. So arousal is something we all experience. All humans go through it. We fluctuate throughout the day at different levels of arousal. And it is conceptualized on a continuum. If you look at the bottom of the graph, you will see arousal, low, medium, and high. And then on the left side of the graph going up is performance. You have low, medium, and high. What you'll notice is that in the blue area, we have a low state of arousal and a low level of performance. And then as we move along the continuum and we become more aroused or maybe excited, we reach an optimal level of performance. And that green window there is the window of tolerance, the window of safety for these children. And that is the window of arousal that we're trying to get them to reach through building trust. So then to the right of that green area, we have the red area, the red zone. And that is where you have fight, flight, or fawning behavior. Fawning is a new term that is recently added to the fight, flight, or freeze trio. And what it means is that a kid who is overly anxious or has been traumatized or who is in a state of complete fear and danger will do anything to please the people around them and to stay off their radar. And so there's something called compulsive compliance, and the child will comply by all means necessary. So you'll see a lot of people-pleasing behavior and just doing what they're told in order to prevent anything terrible from happening to them. So for the kids that you think have experienced trauma but are not defiant or angry or sad or blue, they could be fawning. And so I just want you to be aware of that. Let's see if I have anything else I want to share. Oh, and I also want to point out that you'll see there's a tipping point, right? So at the top, as arousal rises, you get to an optimal level at the top there. And then after a certain point, when you become over-aroused or too highly aroused, it drops off drastically again, right? So you are reaching a tipping point that pushes you out of your window of tolerance and into a place where you're very fearful and very afraid and anxious. And what happens is performance drops drastically as well. So you're not going to see a child who is in a state of fight, flight, or fawn, or who is over-aroused or fearful all the time, being able to perform very well in relationships or in school or in sports or in other areas of functioning in life, because they are literally unable to calm their brain down enough to be in the optimal area. And that is shown to us through the way that the prefrontal cortex of the brain literally will stop functioning and stop working when a child is in this high state of arousal. So the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that makes all the decisions and has rational thought and is logical. And when that is not working, because the child is in the red zone, they will not be performing well. And one example of this is that, you think about your own life and times when you felt very anxious, and try to ask yourself how well you did in those situations, and how was your performance. And so if we stop focusing so much on performance and grades and school and focus more on building trust and safety, naturally the performance will go up, right? The grades might start to improve and the behavior might start to improve, because when you're in the optimal state, you can feel more calm and you can function better and at a higher level. Some examples of the blue, green, and red state would be, so blue would be freezing, kind of like you see an animal do in the wild. They literally freeze and play dead. And so the way this will translate it into a child's behavior is with isolating themselves, shutting down, disconnecting, being unresponsive, just very feeling like you just can't reach them. They're shut down. They're in a shutdown mode, and that is for purposes of safety. For feeling, this is because they feel as though their safety is threatened, and so in order to protect themselves, they need to disconnect and go into a shutdown version of themselves. An optimal level, in the green level, an example might be, for all of us, is like how we feel at the beginning of the day. Not right after we wake up. We're probably more in the blue at that point, a little sleepy, a little groggy. But as we move along through the day, maybe we have our cup of tea or our cup of coffee, we take a shower, and if we're excited to start the day, we might be feeling very alert, very confident, ready to go and take on the day. And that's the way you want to feel at your best, at your optimal level. You're focused, you're engaged, but you're calm. And then an example of what a child or an adult or anybody would look like in the red zone is very angry behavior, aggressive, defensive behavior, panic, fear, anxiety. It might be a child who's throwing a tantrum. It might be a teenager who gets into fights at school or into fights with family members. It could be children that elope. We have children that try to run away. So that's a state of fight, flight, and fawn. And I mentioned a little bit more about fawn earlier. For those of you who may have joined late, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat box, and I will try to answer them at the end of this presentation. If any questions go unanswered, I will gladly accept emails with questions, and I will respond to those as well. I am Beth Tyson, in case you missed it earlier, and I am presenting on how to build trust after trauma. And thank you for being here too, if I didn't get to say that. So I'm just taking a little break here in the middle to say hello to everyone again. Okay, so now you may ask, what is it that puts a child outside of their window of tolerance, right? And these are what we call triggers, things that tip off, or events, or even feelings in their own body that tip the brain off to danger. And so a lot of times, and most of the time, these triggers are subconscious and unpredictable. However, there are times when the triggers can be predicted, which is good for us because we can prepare ahead of time. So if you think about a child's day, you can think about the times a day that you normally struggle with helping the child, do things, to get things done, or when, are they having meltdowns at a certain time of day? Are there people that come into their life that trigger them, that make it difficult for them? One of the stories I like to share about a family I was working with was that and that's the reason why I have the little picture of the perfume bottles, is because triggers can be anything. You want to think about the five senses, but you also want to think about times of year. But in this case, this story is about a child who was triggered by the smell of his mother's perfume on his teacher at school, right? So a mom had been abusive, and the child was removed and in a foster home, but was refusing to go to school. And nobody could really figure out what was going on. Every morning it was a complete meltdown, going to school without clothes, refusing to get dressed, just tantruming, and just very, very difficult time getting the child to school. We began working with the family in their home, and I was able to get to know the family, and there had been a lot of trauma in this child's past. And in that role, I was able to go and meet with the teacher and talk to them and find out about things that might be triggering for them. And what we were able to figure out through our relationship together and through the relationship I had with the child was that the teacher's perfume was triggering the child's trauma. And so once we figured out and solved that problem, we were able to shift things and get the child to go to school. But these are things we don't normally think about, right? I mean, you could be in a mall with your child and you could walk by someone that has that, their mother's perfume on, or maybe they hear a song in a store on the radio that reminds them of a time or a day that something negative or, a traumatic event happened. And you won't know why, but suddenly the child, either in that moment or later that day, it has become very difficult and challenging with their behaviors. And, if we were able to read minds, we would know that was what happened, but we're not, right? We don't always know. So it's important to remember that you might not know what has triggered the child, but typically there is something that you just don't know that is upsetting the child. And if you can figure out what it is and get curious instead of frustrated and angered by the child's behavior, you can become a detective and try and be a little bit more curious instead of angry. So one way you can do that is, for the predictable triggers, is by locating the triggers. And I created this map for you, this graph for you that you can easily make at home. I think it's a great idea for you to do for yourself and for your children, because let's be honest, most people have experienced trauma in their life at some time. 60% of people have at least one adverse childhood experience. That's what the study showed. And so a lot of us are walking around with our own trauma. So I encourage you to make one of these graphs for yourself and for the child you're caring for, because your own trauma can be triggered by the children that you're caring for. So there might be things or events that go on while you're raising the child that trigger your past memories from childhood. And if you can be aware of that and plan ahead for that, then you can, have some coping skills ready and, give yourself some real good self-care during those times of year that might be difficult for you. So here I have an example of a year, and, child is living with mom and she relapses in the winter. Her behavior starts to become erratic. I'm just going to ask, I hear some feedback. I want to make sure everybody is on mute still. If you can, just check your microphone and make sure it's muted. Thank you. So, mom maybe relapses in the winter and her behavior starts to go downhill, right? She's not taking care of the child as well anymore, and she is having a really hard time. You're feeling neglected. During that time, the holidays pop up, right? What do we have at the holidays? A lot of sights and sounds and noises and events and people and family. All of these things can be remembered in your brain as in an association with how you're being treated with mom. So when next, after a year goes by and next winter comes around and the holidays hit and all those sights and sounds and smells start to remind you of when mom began to neglect you or abuse you, then you're going to have a child experiencing a lot of feelings of danger and fear, and in a state of that hyper or hypo arousal by all these triggers that are around him or her. So I want you to think about the 5 senses, think about the time of year, think about sights and sounds and all the things that might be part of your trigger map for yourself, but also for the child. And if the child's old enough, you can do this along with them and have a really rich conversation about, what they have gone through throughout the year, and present it in a way that you really want to help prepare ahead of time, with some coping skills and just with more compassion and empathy for the child during those times that abuse may have happened, or when the child was removed from their family, or maybe there was a death in the family, or maybe it's their birthday. All of these things can be potentially triggering for a child. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about how do we do this thing called increasing trust. And you might want to take some pictures with your iPhone or your phone if you have one of these next couple of screens, so that you can have them with you and you can use them to practice. So I have 6 steps to increasing trust, but first I want to read this little graphic I have here that I absolutely adore, and I think it really speaks in the language of a child who has experienced ACEs and trauma. It says, "I'm afraid," said Rabbit. "What are you afraid of?" asked Bear. "I don't know," replied Rabbit. "I just am." "Then I will sit with you until you're not afraid anymore," said Bear. "We will face it together." Now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting misty over here just reading that. I have chills up and down my legs, and that right there is what every single child on this planet wants to hear. No matter who or what they've been through, they need to hear this, and they need to hear it from you. And that can be incredibly powerful for a child who has never heard those words before. So the first step is empathizing, which is what this bear does for this rabbit in this picture. Empathizing and just understanding that it's okay to feel that way, and accepting the little rabbit's feelings, and just sitting with it and being with it, but also being a support, facing it with the rabbit together. The second thing we want to do is normalize the feelings, experiences, by letting the child know that what they're feeling is very normal, given what they've been through. The fact that they're extremely angry, the fact that they feel afraid and scared or panicked, the fact that they're having intrusive thoughts or images, all of these things are actually very normal for someone who has experienced trauma. They are not crazy or sick. There's nothing wrong with them except for the fact that they are coping with trauma. It's their brain's way of protecting themselves. So it is okay to feel the way they are feeling, and letting them know that. Also want to reflect what the child is feeling or experiencing. So whether it's anger or sadness or fear, whatever the emotions are, you want to reflect to them and let them know that is what you're seeing, because that helps build emotional awareness. So it could be something as simple as, "I can see this makes you very angry." That's all you need to say, and just wait for the reaction to that. Connecting. Connecting is about really being present with the child and not having distractions going on while you're having these conversations, like our lovely cell phones and all the things that love to beep and ding at us and vibrate at us. We need to put those aside when we have these conversations and really truly connect with the child in the moment. And then sharing about your own experiences in life that may have been scary, sad, or anger-inducing. So you can share something about your own life. And then redirecting with asking them how they think they can move forward. So once the emotional reaction is complete, you've sat with them through it, right? You've been there, you've let them express any of the emotions that come up for them, as long as they are safe and they're not harming you or themselves or anyone else. You want to allow the emotions. Just let the feelings be. Let the tears come. Let the screams scream. And if you can shift from a perspective of trying to shut that down, which is all of our natural instincts, right? If you can find the strength to go against that, and trust me, this is not a perfect experience. Nobody's going to do this perfect every time. I certainly don't. I try to do it with my daughter, and I mess up all the time. But we can have this framework in our mind and this idea, and we can do our best. So redirecting to help the child after you've sat with the pain, which believe me is very, very difficult to do, but one of the most powerful gifts you can possibly give a child is to just be with their pain. And then redirecting and asking if there's anything they think would help them feel better or that they could do to move forward. And you want to let this be child-led. So if you have ideas, hold off on them until the child maybe comes up with at least one idea. If the child can't come up with ideas, then you could suggest things. But give them a chance to have ownership, to feel empowered, to help themselves. So this is a script, and this is something you might want to pull out your phone and take a picture of so you could practice it. But it goes through the 6 steps of empathizing, reflecting, normalizing, connecting, sharing, and redirecting. I'll give everyone a moment to look that over and take a picture if you'd like. You know, what I like best about this is, and I see it work with my clients and with even my own daughter, when I share a story of something I've been through, I immediately see a difference, right? I immediately see like this sigh of relief, because when kids understand that they're not the only ones that feel this way, it takes all the pressure off, and it really takes the edge off of whatever it is that they're experiencing, because now they can understand that there is nothing unusual about this in the human experience, that these are things that everybody goes through. So sharing an anecdote or story. Now make sure you're appropriate about what you share and you're age appropriate. So you want to make sure that you are being appropriate and not oversharing or overburdening the child with your own information. But if you will be, sorry, I'm looking, Aline has sent me a text and she just wants to know if I will be sending out the slide presentation. I could do that if people are interested. I would be happy to. Thank you for asking. So yes, so what was I saying there? Just that, well, I don't know, I lost my place, but I'll keep going because we're running out of time. So again, these conversations can bring the child back into their window of tolerance, into that optimal arousal state. So what we want to do, so climbing to safety, and safety being, you know, that optimal level there at the top. Locate with the child where they are on the mountain, bottom, top, blue, green, red. And, you know, keep that in your mind as you observe the child throughout the day. You know, ask yourself, where do I think this child is on the mountain? And what things could I do to possibly move them closer into that green zone? You can brainstorm with them steps that might help them feel safe, and problem solve, again, problem solving the ideas together with the child leading, so that the child earns some empowerment and feels a sense of control over feeling better. And when trust and safety increases, the stress hormones in their brain decrease, and arousal moves back toward the green state. some important notes are that any brief moments of time spent in the green state is a huge accomplishment for children with ACEs and trauma. Don't minimize that. If you see the child in a green state where they're calm, focused, and engaged, maybe it's when they're playing sports, maybe it's when they're doing arts and crafts, maybe it's when they're reading, or whatever it might be, with the exception of screen time. I will take screen time out. That is not what I would consider a green state. That's more of a blue state where they are avoiding or disconnecting. I would say that pay attention to those things. Maybe it's being out in nature or with a pet. So one of the things that's really interesting is that pets and animals, maybe if it can't be a pet, but maybe visiting some animals, is a gateway to having a attachment to something without it being as scary as a human, as an adult, as a person that has already maybe hurt them in the past. So pets and animals, even fish, or little things like that, can be a way to start rebuilding the neural pathways in the brain towards safety and trust, and feeling like they're practicing being attached to something that feels safe enough. Maybe people don't feel safe enough, but pets or animals do. Same with nature. Sitting in an office and talking about their feelings might not work as well as being outside in nature, because nature automatically reduces the stress hormones in your brain. And so if you have a resistant client or a resistant child, and you need to have these conversations, try to do it outside in nature. Another tip is to not remove items and privileges as a punishment. These kids have already lost so much. They're already grieving so much. Grief, ambiguous loss, and grief are two things that these kids are also struggling with. And it's really another part of the root cause of their behavior, is that they're grieving the loss of the life they should have had, the loss of relationships, the loss of their things, like their actual things, their toys, their stuff, and the loss of their mother or father at times. So you want to add things instead. So this could either be done through a reward system instead of a punishment system, or as a punishment, if you want to call it that. I like to call it discipline. You could add things instead of removing things. So add on, okay, if you break X rule, you are going to have to rake the lawn for 45 minutes instead of 15. So add on chores or add on things instead of taking things away. And you want to frequently reassure the child that he, she, or they is safe with you, that you're a safe person, that your job is to keep them safe, and that you will do that no matter what, that their safety is your number one priority. A couple other things we want to talk about is that positive attention and affection can actually be a trigger for children, and they may reject you or push you away with their negative behavior. So one way that we can start to increase trust slowly and incrementally is by just taking time each day, whether it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever time you can, and just observe and reflect what the child is doing during their playtime or during their whatever it is that they like to do. You want to sit and just be an observer with them. Just be there, fully aware, fully intended to just spend that time with them without expecting anything in return. So not expecting them to learn something, not expecting to teach them something, without providing criticism of whatever it is that they're doing. So you're not guiding the child during this time. You are only an observer, and you just spend time watching them play. And if you want to interact, you can reflect what the child is doing instead of intervening with what they're doing. So you can just say, oh, I see you put the red block on top of the blue block. Or, oh, I see you're playing cards with your brother. Or whatever it might be. You just literally state the facts of what you see, and you do it with a warm and loving tone of voice. Because tone of voice is really important here too. Kids immediately pick up on your tone of voice, and they know whether or not you're coming at them with a warm welcome. And so if you try to hide it, they're going to see right through it. So you really make sure you take the time before you have this time together to get yourself centered. Go take a break for a few minutes. Do your coping skills, your breathing, your, whatever it is that helps you gain clarity and calm, whether it's listening to some music, maybe splashing some cold water on your face, whatever it could be. And then join them in their world and just be patient, because after all they've been through, they might reject you out of fear. You have to be patient with these kids. We have a couple of other ideas here. I'm going to fly through this one because of time, and there's some other stuff I want to share with you. But the one thing I will go over on this slide, because I've already said most of these things anyway, is about the secret question box. Secret question box I see work really well with kids who have experienced trauma or who are going through something really difficult, especially older kids that might not be so open to talking about their emotions. What you can offer them is a secret question box, and that's pretty simple. It's just a locked box. Maybe it's even a shoe box with a slit in the top that you keep somewhere safe. And you tell the child that they are allowed to put any question in that box, any message in that box, any feeling in that box, any thought in that box. They can put in there whatever they want, and at a certain designated time each week, you will open the box and read it. If they want you to, if they're willing to do that, you will read the questions and ask them or answer them back via the box. This can take a lot of the fear and pressure off the child for sharing any disturbing information. During this and all instances with the child, you want to make sure that you are keeping your word. Don't break promises if you can't. I mean, I know as parents we all do that at some times. We do have to sometimes break a promise. But try to keep your word as much as you can so that you can build trust. In the end, your trustworthiness is going to make all the difference in how the child behaves. Because they need to know they can trust you first before you're going to be able to really trust them. And that's the opposite, right? We usually expect kids to earn our trust. And the truth is that these kids have already had their trust broken. And parenting a child with trauma is different than parenting a child that has not been traumatized. And so when you have a child who's experienced ACEs or trauma, you need to earn their trust first. Then you'll see the behaviors change. So continue to be honest. Even when it's hard, you need to be honest. And when you can, show your own vulnerability. It's okay to show them that you're sad, scared, and angry. Even if you're a teacher or a school counselor, you're allowed to show your emotions. It's human. I'm not saying get carried away and start crying on their shoulder or become a burden to them in any way. But it's okay to tear up. It's okay to say, I'm angry right now. That's a normal human experience. It's what we do with it afterwards that matters. It's how we cope with it that matters. It's what we make it mean that matters. With children, you always want to use soft tones of voice when they're in distress. The more you escalate, the more they will escalate. So it's important to use soft, calming voice with children and just be patient. This isn't going to change overnight. You might take a few steps forward and then 6 steps back, but you're making progress every day. Be patient. Again, here is a long list of trauma-responsive ideas for both classroom, at home, and I don't think I have time. Nope, I don't have time to go through all of those. So again, I can send the slides out afterwards if people are interested. But these are all some ways here to get the children to move closer to the green zone or into the green zone, back into their window of tolerance. So now I'll share a little bit about my book. I mentioned it in the beginning, but this has been My most recent baby, if you will, it has been such a work of love and passion, and it really is the most exciting thing I've done in a long time. And I was inspired, like I said, from my work within the foster care system, working with grandparents who were raising grandchildren and other relatives who were raising children. And what I found during this time was that I really needed a book. I needed a children's book to take to these homes to help the children understand what they were going through, to provide coping skills, and to let them know that they are not the only ones in this situation. Grandparents raising grandchildren have so little support and resources available to them, and they need it more than ever right now, especially with COVID and how it's affecting the older population. So my book was published in November of last year, and the feedback I've received has been overwhelming and just has really touched my heart in so many ways, in so many instances. And inside the book is not only the story of this little guy Sullivan, who suddenly has to live with mom due to safety issues in his home, or suddenly has to live with grandma due to safety issues in his home, but it also introduces mindfulness practices in a child-friendly manner that you can start to use right away in your own home. It provides language for adults to talk to children about hard life changes. It's a model for adults on using empathy, and it teaches the coping skills for uncertainty and anxiety, which is, primarily what children are experiencing when in a situation like this. This is also meant to create awareness, like I said, for children, because often they get bullied in this situation. They are made fun of at school for grandma or grandpa picking them up instead of mom or dad. And, if this could be used in classrooms to build empathy with the peers and the other children who are maybe not in this situation, but can have a deeper understanding and empathy for it once they've read the story. And so that was also a hope of mine with writing the book. So please share with anybody who might be able to benefit and help children in this situation. So the role of hope, and I know I'm running out of time. Let's see if I can tell this story quickly. I had a client who was about to turn 18 and age out of the system, the foster care system, without being adopted. He had bounced around to many different foster homes throughout his young life. I believe he entered this system in elementary school, and just was not able to attach or trust people because of all of the disrupted relationships he had and the trauma that he had experienced and the lack of trust he had in others. When I came to see him, like I said, he was about to turn 18 and he did not want to be adopted. He was in a kinship family. He was living with his aunt and uncle. And he had really gotten close to the counselor before me, but she had moved on for some reason, whether it be a new job or something else. And so when I came into the picture, he wanted nothing to do with me. He would not speak to me. He would not come to the meetings. So I did what I could, and I just started working with the parents because they really wanted to help him, and they really wanted to adopt him. And so I began working with them, and every week I showed up, and I showed up on time, and I was there, and every week I met with the parents or the mom or the dad, and I did this type of work, helping them understand trauma and coaching them on how to help this child. And like I said, the ideal situation would be to have him join in on these conversations, but he just wouldn't. He had been hurt too many times. Finally, after months of this relationship, he agreed without me pushing or being nagging about it. I just asked him one day if he would like to just sit and listen. He didn't actually have to participate or share anything. He could just sit and listen to us talk. And he agreed to do that. And he continued to agree to do that over time. He would come to each meeting. And what happened was there, you might think, well, geez, what's that going to do, right? But this kid got to hear how much the caregivers, I guess I was calling them mom and dad, but they were aunt and uncle, how much his aunt and uncle really loved him, really cared about what he was going through, and really wanted to adopt him. And I worked with the family and in that capacity and in that way until he was adopted. And it was just before his 18th birthday. And so what I share that story with you is because just because you are not, hold on, let me back up. So there's an analogy about opening a jar, right? When you hand someone a jar that is tightly closed, a lot of times it takes 2 or 3 people to open it. So you might try to open it, won't budge, won't open it. You hit it with a knife, you run it under cold water, hand it to the next person, they can't open it. Hand it to the third person and pop, the lid comes right off. Well, guess what? It wasn't that person necessarily who opened the jar. It was all the other hands and all the other attempts and all the other tries and all the other relationships with that jar, the jar being Mike in this situation, that opened the jar. So I want you to know that if you feel like you're not getting anywhere, if you feel like this is a hopeless situation you're in, that just because you don't see the success, just because you don't see it right now, doesn't mean that you're not one of the people with your hand on the jar, twisting every day to try and help this child heal from their trauma and trust again. So here's a little bit about, and I know we're probably over just by 1 minute, but there is a little bit information here that I'll share with you about post-traumatic growth. And I won't go into all that because I could do an entire webinar just on post-traumatic growth, which maybe I will do that after this. But it's something for you to look into. It's something that typically happens for children over 8 years old. This might not happen with younger children, but there is a growth that can take place for children who have experienced trauma, and for all of us, adults as well. And in my own situation, I know I certainly have. Share a little bit about me. I lost my mom suddenly when I was 26, and I went through a lot of PTSD after that happened. And but in the end, it inspired me to get my degree to become a therapist and to work with children who are grieving. And so it brought me to where I am today. And without her death, I don't know that I would be here in this situation and in this role. And I'm very glad that I am. So that's a good example of how you can grow from something that seems terrible and unimaginable. That good things, there are good things to come out of that. Not to minimize what I went through or what other people go through with trauma at all, because this isn't possible for everyone. Post-traumatic growth is not possible for everybody. But there is a possibility for some of us to have growth. I wanted, for anyone who's still on, I just have to share this video of this little girl and her grandmom who sent me this after reading the book.
Thank you, Miss Beth. For my Sullivan.
For my Sullivan.
Do you like Sullivan?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you like the book about Sullivan?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book. Thank you, Miss Beth.
Thank you, Miss Beth.
Bye.
Bye.
I can't get enough of that. Oh my gosh, her little voice is just too much. So to stay in touch, the good news is if you are interested in receiving a free one-on-one 30-minute consultation with me for coaching or for training people in your organization, please reach out to me. You can send me an email at admin@bethtyson.com. You can also reach me on my website at bethtyson.com and look me up on social media. I am there and sharing a lot of stuff and ideas and concepts regarding trauma-responsive care. Here's a list of resources. You might also want to take a shot of that, but again, I can send out the presentation. And thank you all for participating. It's really been a pleasure to share this information with you. I hope it's been helpful. I know it was a lot, but if you just even take a few things from this and try and apply it, I know that you'll see some movement and some shifting in your relationships. So now I will open it up for question and answer. And I'm not sure if there has been any questions, so we'll see.
Hi.
Hi.
Sarah asked a question. She said, can sharing your story re-traumatize or trigger further? I don't even understand my own writing. Or trigger, I guess, further trauma.
Well, that's subjective. I mean, if it were to happen, if you were going to share about it, I would highly suggest doing it with a trained professional, with being in some kind of professional trauma counseling. So whether it's somebody who is a psychologist who has experience with trauma responsive therapy, you want to make sure that you're working with a trauma therapist if you're going to start talking and sharing about previous trauma. That would be my suggestion.
And then also Esther asked if there's a way to build trust with children who have learning disabilities such as autism, if there's a different way in building trust with them.
I would have to say that autism, I haven't done a lot of work in that area, but I know that there are a lot of comorbid diagnoses. I think building trust is pretty universal, in my opinion, the ways that you would do it. I'll have to think about that one a little bit deeper and get back to you via email. I want to make sure I'm giving you the right answer on that.
And then Jen asks, are there suggestions for climbing to safety for teachers and educators?
That could be a whole new webinar. Yes, of course, there are ways that you can, because here's the thing, it needs to be a bottom-up approach, right? So whether you're the parent, the teacher, counselor, you need to be in a state of calm. You need to be within your window of tolerance in order to be effective with the child. So anything, you need to start paying attention to your own window of tolerance and when you're inside of it and outside of it, and try to start increasing time inside the window. And the things that you do that are inside the window could be the same things that you do when you're feeling outside the window to get you back in. So whether it's doing like tension releasing exercises with tightening up your body really, really tight and holding it for a second and then letting it go. And these are things that you can do sort of discreetly if you needed to. That's that freeze and melt video on Go Noodle. You can look that up. If you're a teacher, you might be familiar with Go Noodle. But it's called Freeze and Melt, and it's something teachers and students can do. Always getting a breath of fresh air if you need to, taking a break. Like if you're outside of your window of tolerance and you're trying to help a child who's outside of their window, it's not going to go well. So you need to maybe take a break. And I highly recommend that in any situation, whether it's at home as a parent. I do it myself. There are times when my 4-year-old pushes me outside of my window of tolerance, and I say, I love you, but I need to go take a minute. I need to go calm down for a minute. And I go into another room where I can still hear her to make sure she's safe, and I'm not gone very long. But I just go and I regroup and I catch my breath and I remind myself of how much I love her and that she's just a little person with big emotions, and that this isn't personal. She isn't trying to be a bad kid or isn't, but that if she's out of control, she feels out of control. She needs me to be in control so I can help get her back, because we are the example, right? Children observe or learn through observation. So you can be a corrective, healing experience for a child who has experienced negative events and adversity in their life, and that you don't react the way their abusers did, right? So you can be the calm one. And that can really shift the child's belief system. So if the child is expecting you to get really angry back at them and you stay calm, and you do that over time and again and again and again, it's going to start changing their belief system about adults and about parents, because their belief system up until this point is that, I have my big emotions and mom and dad have their big emotions back at me. Where if you can stay calm, the child will start to learn and change their beliefs that, oh, she's going to stay calm if I do this? Okay, all right. Well, then maybe I'm not in so much danger anymore. Maybe things are safe here. Maybe I can trust this person. But they need you to be that model for them. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, and then Sarah asks, how do you help kids who are resistant to using calming strategies such as deep breathing?
Well, for one, you need to make sure that deep breathing is being done properly for anxiety. So, what a lot of people are taught is deep breathing is taking the deepest breath in that you can and holding it and then letting it out. So if you do that over and over again, you can actually induce anxiety instead of reducing anxiety. So it's really important that the breath that they're taking is not so much deep as it is slow. So it's a slow breath to in breath to the count of 4, and then a slow exhale to the count of maybe 6 or 7. And so it's not this big, huge, it's not that. It's much more subtle than that. It's a very slow and intentional in-breath to maybe the count of 4 at the most, and then a longer out-breath to 6 or 7 or 8. So that would be my first thing. Maybe they're doing it, maybe the way that they've been taught to do deep breathing has been in making them anxious. I don't know. But if they're not into that, then I would say movement. What happens when our fight, flight, fear is triggered, fight, flight, freeze is triggered, is that all of the hormones in the brain are being released for the person to run or to fight or to do something physical with their body. So if you can get moving with a child, that's going to be probably the most effective thing for them. If they can't do, the deep breathing and visualizations and those calming behaviors, I would say some really intense movement, because that'll burn off the cortisol that's being released, which is a stress hormone, and it will help them get back to the green zone. But kids need, all that movement and exercise when you notice that they are feeling overwhelmed. Moving. They need to move.
Then Belinda asks, are there some strategies so foreign to that child that it has a negative impact? How do you adjust?
Not really sure how to answer that one right now, because I need more information.
Yeah.
I think I need more information to answer that question. So, Belinda, if you're still with us, if you could send me an email with more information, then I'd be happy to respond to you.
And then Cheryl asks if you have any suggestions to cope with children now during COVID-19.
Yes. So, tips for coping now with COVID. I did a blog on this a couple of months ago, and I actually did a webinar with the National Association of School Nurses a couple of months ago now about how to cope with COVID anxiety. And, some kids are experiencing this as a trauma. Not all kids, but some kids are, because it may remind them of a death in the family, or it may, for any number of reasons, it's a situation where there's a lot of loss and grieving going on right now, and a lot of fear of, am I safe, right? It's bringing up all those questions of, am I safe? And so what it's important to do, some things you can do, is you really want to be limiting the amount of exposure to the topic that might be stress-inducing. So if you have people all the time around you talking about it, if you have the TV on all the time in the background, the media talking about it all the time, those kind of things are really going to ratchet up the anxiety for the kid. So you want to shield them from some of that information if you can. Just obviously being honest and real about it, but at the same time, not overwhelming them with like too much information that they don't need, that you don't know is true or accurate. It has to be tempered in some way. Some other things you can do there are some books that people have already published for children about COVID-19 online, and so you can look those up and read those with them. But they really need to explain. So when kids know what it is and they have an understanding of it, then their brain naturally starts to slow down and calm down. An example from my own life would be, my house was struck by lightning when I was a kid. I don't know, I was maybe 8 or 9, and my house was struck by lightning, and it struck the house right over my mother's bed where she was sleeping, and it blew a hole in the house, and it was really frightening, right? And so for I don't know how long, maybe a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years after that, I would get sick to my stomach. I would watch every time the clouds changed. I was on high alert, right? I was hyper aroused. I was on high alert for danger all the time. I'd check the weather all the time. I was watching the clouds to see if they looked like thunder clouds or not. I was, if a thunderstorm did come, I would get sick, physically ill, sick to my stomach. Being sick to your stomach for a kid is a symptom of anxiety. And so you really want to pay attention if your child is always talking about feeling sick to their stomach. And so yeah, I was really scared. And for years this went on. And back then, kids, I didn't get therapy for that kind of thing. It was just like, get over it, kid. But no, I had really supportive parents who taught me all about what thunder and lightning was. And once I knew what it was, because it was such an abstract thing for a kid to understand, once I knew what it was and I could put words to it and understand it and how it worked and what it did, my anxiety started to go away. Because I was like, oh, okay, this is what it is, and this is how unlikely it is to ever happen again. But I needed knowledge. I needed information. And that's why I encourage parents and teachers to try and be honest with the children about what's happening in their life. Because if you don't know the truth of your own life, how can you feel calm? How can you feel a sense of control or mastery over your life and your feelings and your emotions if you're constantly wondering, like, what's going on? Why don't I live with my mom anymore? Why is grandma raising me? And everything's hush-hush and a secret. We need to bring these things out into the light of day and explain to children in an age-appropriate way what has happened and what is going on. And that was a big reason for me writing the book. And because I wanted to help parents and others, social workers, counselors, do that. Because that's one of the hardest things to do, is tell a hard truth to a child. We just don't have the words. Unless you're trained for it the way I have been, you just don't have the words as much as you want to, or you may be well-intentioned. It's easier to just not talk about these issues. And what I want to encourage people to do is to try and get the truth out there. Educate the child that you're caring for about what has happened in their life, whether it's due to drug abuse, violence, incarceration. There's all sorts of resources out there. Sesame Street does a fantastic job of educating young children in age-appropriate ways about incarceration, about drug